What's up, guys? Welcome back to Engine25 Reviews. My name is Brandon. I'm a big old nerd who likes to watch movies. And today we're talking about Elvis, directed by Baz Luhrmann. Came out, let me pull up my dates again. It released in the United States on June 24th, 2022, after playing at Cannes and releasing a little earlier in Australia. Of course, that's where Baz Luhrmann is an Australian director, so that makes a lot of sense, I suppose. And it's about this guy who was a rock and roll singer in the early '60s, and apparently he was popular. I don't know. I'm not. And we're of course joined today by regular guest on the show, Catherine Burrell. How you doing, Katy?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks.
Yeah, you can see more of Katy's work at catherineburrell.com. She's studying to be a PhD in awesomeness. And
I'm going to tell that to my students, get them to like me.
Excellent. Yeah, so Elvis stars Austin Butler as Elvis. Austin Butler is he's been in like every teeny bopper show of my era. It's like I don't know, like the Nickelodeon and Disney Channel shows that were on when I was watching, or when my wife and my little brother were watching teeny bopper shows on Nickelodeon. And he's credited in like 2 episodes of all of them.
I mean, good for him. It pays the bills.
Exactly. No, yeah, I'm not making fun of it. It was just kind of funny because he shows up everywhere. And then joined,
really,
of course,
does.
By Tom.
I'm looking at it now.
Yeah. Joined, of course, by Tom Hanks as Colonel Tom Parker, who is Elvis's career manager, promoter guy. Tom Hanks wearing a lot of makeup and talking with a funny accent, and he does this really funny thing with his mouth, and I was all in for it. That was how do you? Let's backtrack a sec. Are you an Elvis fan, Katy?
Yeah, I actually I'm a sucker for anything rock and roll. Yeah, that too. But I have a very specific memory that ties me to Elvis Presley. And I feel like a lot of people might have a moment like this because his music and his fame has had such longevity since his death.
Oh yeah.
And this film goes into that and kind of builds that up for sure. But
at the end of the movie, it claims he is still the #1 selling solo artist ever. And I didn't confirm that, but it seems possible to me.
I believe it because I have a very specific memory, probably one of my very first memories. I must have been like 4 or 5. And I was in a music store with my dad back when you would still go buy CDs.
Good times.
And my dad was looking at his music. We were obviously in like the rock and blues section. And I picked out my Elvis Presley CD. And I was just like, Dad, I want this. I want it so bad. I begged for my Elvis Presley CD. And being like a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, my dad was like, hell yeah.
Excellent.
Like, of course I'm going to like foster this. And so I just remember having that CD, and then, and just like, so I've been a fan of Elvis. Elvis was probably the first singer that I was ever a fan of, just because like, even so young, like I knew who he was, probably thanks to my dad, because he is self-taught on the guitar and he still plays all the time. And we listen to a lot of music. So, yeah.
Are you a musician at all, Katy?
A little bit. When I was in high school and then a little bit in college, I did some singing and choir. I tried my hand at the piano during that time. Didn't really like it, but I've recently picked back up the violin. So
I played violin. I had no idea.
No way.
Yeah, I played like from middle school through college, and then
oh my god, I didn't know that.
When it came to a point that I had to like be a professional, and like the only way to play was to do it for a job, it kind of went away. But I got it's sitting right over there. It's been in the case for a long time.
When I was very young, I think I was like 8, I just begged for a violin for a long time, and then my grandparents got me one, and they found a really good deal, and it's really nice. It's actually right behind me.
Nice.
But
I can't reach mine, but it's over there.
I started lessons when I was very young, and then my instructor got divorced and moved, and I never found another one. And then I moved here, and there's a music school right down the street. There's lots of music schools in New England. So I took that back up again, and I'm hoping that after this move, I'll be able to find another one closer to where I'm moving to. So
nice. We both went to Georgia Southern, and a big reason I landed on Georgia Southern instead, my other likely choice was Armstrong Atlantic, which I'm not sure exists anymore. I think it's been annexed by Georgia Southern anyway. But they didn't have an orchestra. So I ended up at Georgia Southern because they had an orchestra. Yeah. Anyway.
Georgia Southern has a wonderful, wonderful orchestral program. They're so good.
Yeah. I was in it for 4 years. So yeah, I play violin. I've done some singing. I am able to play a lot of things that have strings because a lot of the principles are the same. You just have,
the hardest.
If you know the string order, you can usually kind of figure things out. But I wouldn't say that I do play anything else. Like I can play piano, but I would not say that I do. Like it's hard. I can't do both hands at the same time, which is kind of a problem.
I feel like I would have no problem like breezing through a music appreciation class, but anything after that, I'd be a little more like out of my depth. A little bit, you know. I certainly don't claim to be a very good musician, but
we'll come back to this point. But the process of making music and really the process of producing artistic or like logical kind of things is very interesting to me. And that'll come back around when we're talking about the movie in a little bit more depth.
But so I automatically felt invested when I went into the movie. No, you're fine. You're fine. I automatically felt invested going into this movie because of that very specific memory of wanting an Elvis CD when I was like 6 or something like that, you know? So I know I'm very biased, and I think you'll agree that there's a lot to love about this movie. And then there's also a lot that's also kind of like, what?
There's some choices that raise some questions. There are certainly a handful of Elvis songs that I like. This is my parents' music. I grew up listening to probably not so much early 60s, but like 70s classic rock and that kind of thing. And then occasionally like somebody like Elvis or Johnny Cash or somebody like that would drop in on one of those stations. So like it's the music that my mom was listening to when she was like very young, like grade school.
That's such an interesting distinction though, like the way that you're phrasing it to me, which, is totally normal. But it's just, I don't think of it as my parents' music, like I know it's of that generation and even before them, but maybe that has something to do with me begging for a CD at such a young age.
And that's probably fair, and I would say like a lot of the music they were playing is my music. Like I'm a big Eagles fan. A lot of, it's kind of mid 70s era kind of stuff into the 80s. I really like, but
I just wouldn't, I don't know. That's so interesting to me because I don't necessarily consider it like my parents' music. I mean, like I'm as much of
and again, there's a lot, there's certainly like a lot of songs that I enjoy. Like I can find things to appreciate about it now for absolutely. But it's not, Elvis isn't on my like go-to list of things to play, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I definitely do. That would be such a really interesting research paper about like how we like talk about, generations of music and identify with it. Anyway, sorry, my communication brain is reeling.
My music is certainly that of like old, what the Gen Zers would call old people music, but probably a little, what I gravitate to is a little bit after Elvis, but I'm certainly aware of Elvis, and he's one of those that you can't not respect the things that he did for me. Like he's responsible for changing rock and roll. Like, and certainly not the only one that you can point to having some part in that, but probably the most famous one.
And I love how in this film, they make a point to address the landscape of music at that time and show that this
they
was
absolutely
kind of an oncoming thing. And then somehow Elvis just became like the poster child, so to speak, of that changing musical tradition.
So like I wouldn't necessarily say that, excuse me, he was riding the wave, but he pointed the ship, and a lot of other people followed.
Yeah, but and not only followed but supported and influenced, and they were in the same current, so to speak. Yeah. I didn't really have a lot of like knowledge or backstory on how Elvis's career started, which I really appreciated this movie doing. Because like I said, my dad, he's such a rock and blues fan, like my whole life he's played it and listened to it. He had and still has like BB King posters and like all that kind of stuff, and like records, Elvis, Beatles, BB King records, like on his wall that he like displays. So like I just BB King's always been like in his office my whole life, and I'm like seeing it in my mind's eye. And so like I didn't expect BB King to come up in this movie,
right?
Because I'm ignorant or what. And of like that beginning career and everything going on in Memphis, and I was just like, oh my God, this contextualizes so much stuff for me. This for Act 1 of this movie. So I just really appreciate it. Like I don't want to say education, because you have to always approach a narrative work with some kind of degree of skepticism,
right,
of events, but that doesn't mean that they don't hold truth. And they can't also educate you.
Yeah.
So there has to be a healthy skepticism of those events and how they are portrayed, which is leaning into a media literacy conversation. But I certainly learned more about the state of music at this time and how Elvis and others contributed to its blossoming into something that was so identifiable with so many people.
Yeah, and
at that time.
And it's something that I didn't super know about, and it turns out was fairly true, is a lot of his influence came from African American music, and he brought a lot of that music into the more public eye of the white audience. So and he was a really bridging point at an era where like this is the early 60s. Yeah. This is when civil rights is at like the peak of its history. So it's the fight for this fight for civil rights, at least. So it's just really interesting the way all the things fall together like that.
It's a culmination of events and storytelling in a very contentious time period.
Absolutely,
for sure.
So what about Elvis movies?
I've actually never seen one of his movies.
What? I would make fun of you, except I haven't seen very many of them. There are, and looking at his Wikipedia page, there are quite a few. I have seen Love Me Tender. I have seen Blue Hawaii. I have seen Viva Las Vegas.
Yeah.
That all of them? At least all the ones that stick out to me when I see the titles.
And those titles are so like ubiquitous of his career too, also because like his music is in them.
Absolutely. No, yeah.
So and they just have such longevity, and I think kind of live in an you can imagine it if you've never even seen it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it is so, I don't want to say mainstream, but iconic in a way, or like integrated into that zeitgeist. And I lived out west for a couple of years while I was doing my master's degree, and my parents still live out in Arizona. They just moved to a small, like the last like Route 66 town, really. Nice. And that's like their economy in the town is Route 66 tourism. And all along that in that area along Route 66. You can still drive portions of it, or it'll say like this is Route 66, but it's kind of like divided up, there that time period of Elvis and the 50s and Marilyn Monroe, like we were talking about earlier pre-show, and it's all still so alive. John Wayne, not that I like John Wayne at all, but still that culture is still so alive and flourishing, and like a historical tourism sector out west. But but the reason I don't like John Wayne is because he was so sexist and racist, and he was integral in the.
You're absolutely not wrong.
In the Hollywood blacklisting, I can't. I hate it. Like my grandmother loves John Wayne. I don't, she's 80, 86, 80, something like that. And I visited her like a year ago, and she just was playing John Wayne the whole time. So,
I mean, there are certainly some John Wayne movies that I really like. I like The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, but if from a principled point of view, like nothing you said is unfair.
I just, that time period, like we were saying, is just so contentious in so many different ways. And I mean, that's just one of them is, who was on screen when and why and how and what they did with it. And so, that time period is as much reflected in Hollywood as it is in history books. So I appreciate the time that Baz Luhrmann took with this movie to address the state of the union, so to speak, while also delivering a very biopic-y type of film. But I appreciate the attention to the outside going on.
Me too.
Instead of just Elvis's life.
That was there. In fact, like I might say that we spend a little bit too. There are well, we'll talk about it in a little bit more when we roll those spoilers. But there's like some things that I think are relevant that get glossed over in this movie. At least relevant to the story they want to tell. Like the angle of this movie is they're really kind of bringing light to all the stuff with Colonel Tom Parker, because like they had early on. Well, ultimately the guy's a shyster, and he's just really good at convincing people that he had good ideas, including Elvis. And then by the end of it, he had taken a great deal of the Presley fortune that he may or may not have been entitled to, but he's just like this.
You know what? He would have made a really good. Would have made a really good spy.
You're probably not wrong. But it's interesting. This guy's played by Tom Hanks. Like I said, like he's wearing a lot of makeup. Like Tom Hanks isn't known for like changing his appearance a whole lot. Like even sometimes he grows a beard or a mustache, or sometimes they put gray in his hair or whatever. But you always look at him and say you can see it's Tom Hanks. And like in this one, like he's in a fat suit and he's got prosthetics on. And he does this really funky thing with his mouth all the time. He barely opens his mouth when he talks. He talks like this. And he speaks with an accent. And he is the villain of this movie. How many times can we say that that we have Tom Hanks as the villain in a major motion picture? Like it's not common.
And I was actually having a conversation about this right after I saw it with, I think it was my mom, maybe. And I think she had said something to the degree of people are not liking Tom Hanks in this movie. And I said,
because Tom Hanks is always likable.
Exactly. And I said, I don't think it's the performance. I think his performance is top notch. That's a lot of hard work. But what I think it is that people cannot reconcile Tom Hanks being a villain, even with all that makeup and the prosthetics.
Yeah.
And the costuming. It is so hard to see Tom Hanks in such a morally decayed role. And I use that phrasing because of the way that they portray the character at the beginning of the movie and at the end. He's very sick, and like actually the character is sick, and it kind of it was very jarring for that to be like the first thing that we see going to this movie is Tom Hanks as the Colonel, but he's like, let's go back to the beginning kind of moment,
Right.
and he just looks like a ghost. Very like morally decayed, like the outside reflects the inside of this character. And it's so weird to see.
He was born in 1909 and he died in 97. And that's kind of where we pick up with him in late 96, where he's like on his deathbed in the hospital, but he's still like, he goes down to the casino with an IV bag attached to him because he's a gambling addict. He was 87 years old when he passed in 97.
Yeah. So I think it's just Tom Hanks, I don't think can deliver a bad performance. I do not think that is possible.
I agree. And that's what one of my biggest excitement points for this movie. Like my wife wanted to see it because she's a big fan of Elvis, and I wanted to see it because I wanted to see Tom Hanks play this dirtbag.
And he does it so well, which is why I think people find it so difficult and they don't like it. Because like it or not, Tom Hanks is like, he's beloved.
He's Forrest Gump.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. So I understand, but it is a very hard thing to wrap your mind around, and a very different kind of character for Tom Hanks. So I don't know. I have a whole like list of like, if I was thinking like what would get nominations for the Academy Awards, because I know people are like buzzing about that a little bit right now, because this is a very high caliber film. There are things that work and things that don't work. And I just don't know. I mean, the Academy voting and nominations have been so wishy-washy over the last decade. It's become hard to predict, or harder and harder to predict.
Sure.
So I just don't know. I mean, I think the Academy is still predominantly made up of white men. Please,
old white men at this point.
But I'm assuming like they've been trying to, diversify the voting pool and whatever. But
which are all good steps to take, but it's not happening very fast.
Right, and I mean, like these things do take time, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, we have to recognize it's still predominantly white men. And so I think this predominantly white male voting body would vote for a beloved actor like Tom Hanks, who is a white man, for the Academy Award. I don't know if they would credit it as best actor or best supporting actor, because this film is very much about Elvis and the Colonel.
I think he'd be best supporting. I think Elvis probably trumps him for screen time. And if that is that's one of the last things that they pick, if there's like a if it gets to the point as to which one is which, and the movie can only have one of each. So a movie can be multiple supporting characters can be nominated for a movie. It's it's rare or impossible for actor or for best actor or best actress to get more than one nomination for the same movie. So if you're determining which one of them is the best actor, it's probably Elvis. His name's in the title, and or Austin Butler as Elvis, because his name's in the title, and I'm guessing he trumps Tom Hanks for screen time.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. But they could, just depending on if Tom Hanks has anything else coming out this year that they think
Right.
he has a good shot with, that would determine how they also want to credit them. Because you can be double nominated, but it has to be for different films.
Right.
And it can't be in the same category. You cannot be double nominated for 2 different films in the same category. I believe that's right. And the only reason I know this is because I had to look it up earlier this year with Andrew Garfield, because he was in The Eyes of Tammy Faye and Tick, Tick, Boom.
Coming out this the the movie where he plays Geppetto is coming out in September this year. This says Disney Plus, so it might not be. Okay.
If they think it has a shot, they'll do a limited run.
Right.
In the 6 cities that they would have to. So I don't know. But Andrew Garfield this past year, he did The Eyes of Tammy Faye and Tick, Tick, Boom. And
both
he was
fantastic.
lead actor.
Well, the Tick, Tick, Boom is really good. I liked him, and I liked his performance in Tammy Faye. I also love Jessica Chastain and Tammy Faye. But
my God, so
I don't think the movie was okay.
But they had to just decide how they wanted to credit Andrew Garfield.
Right.
And what would get him, the best nomination or shot at winning. And I think they honestly chose wrong. I don't know. I think so, because they decided to credit, he had to choose, basically, which was best actor for The Eyes of Tammy Faye, because it would be a best actor nomination, not best supporting for Tammy Faye for sure, or best actor for Tick, Tick, Boom. And they chose Tick, Tick, Boom because I think it was the more technical, difficult role. But I don't know. I just feel like he would have gotten farther with Tammy Faye. But the point is that there's that distinction that they have to think about in the crediting of the roles and how they're nominated, if the film is thinking about that. And you had best believe that everybody behind Elvis is making those kinds of decisions and how they want everybody credited for this award season coming up.
Right.
That
makes sense.
And Austin Butler obviously would be a best actor nomination. And I think that's totally deserved. I think
he deserves the nomination. What else is coming out this year? That's the question you got to ask.
And we won't really know, who the other contenders would be until about Christmas time, really. That's when they all come out, because that's so close to the end of the voting window, or the timeline for the voting window to open up, and the eligibility requirements to be in the running for the Academy Awards. So I don't think we'll know until later, which I think is why it was a risky choice to release Elvis in the summertime. I thought they would have released this in the winter at Thanksgiving or Christmas. And I think that was the original intention, maybe, because the film opens with a Christmas card, and clear references to the Colonel as also the Snowman, his other nickname.
The Snowman, making it snow.
And that comes up a few times, throughout the film. So that makes total sense. But they completely open up on Christmas card, very Christmassy themed iconography in this film. And I was like, oh, I think they wanted to release this later, I think they probably intended it to come out last Christmas, but with COVID and production and everything, they settled on a Cannes release, and then immediately open it, which is another good move. That's why you get big films in the summer, because of Cannes. But, I don't know. I think they definitely want those nominations and they want that buzz, but they're going to have to work to keep it up throughout the fall, so that by the time the voting comes around in January to release the nominees, that they'll still be a topic. And I think they're just going to keep promoting Austin Butler until that happens.
You're probably
and honestly, it's
right.
Deserved.
No,
it's
absolutely
deserved.
Anything else we want to touch on before we go to spoilers? We'll talk about
I
some
don't
stuff in a
think
little more
so.
detail.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Cool. So for listeners, here on out, full spoilers. Just we're gonna. Then again, it's nothing here that you can find it on his Wikipedia page. That's basically the plot of the movie. But there's yeah. So here on out, we're talking about the movie in full detail in case that's a concern for any listeners. So
you know what, the one thing that was spoiled for me in this movie, that I actually didn't know that would be a spoiler, I think, would be that I did not know that Priscilla actually left him. I did not know that.
Okay, so let's start there. A criticism that could be leveled at this movie is it paints Elvis in a very positive light compared to the Colonel. Like the Colonel is, and it's probably, it may or may not have been like dramatized, but there's definitely a villain of the piece, and it's Tom Hanks as Tom Parker.
Yes. And it's a very traditional antagonist protagonist
kind of relation. Yes, absolutely. And it kind of looks at Elvis with rose colored glasses, and there was some turbulence with Priscilla that, like, I kind of feel like the whole Priscilla relationship, like, it's present here, and they're, like they have a baby together, and she's in the movie, but like a lot of the stuff that happened between them, I feel is kind of glossed over because it more focuses on his musical and financial career than his personal life.
Yeah. And that's why I feel like it's not entirely biopicky. Because I feel like this film very much picks and chooses which parts of his life to.
And that's not necessarily an uncommon thing. Like the movie probably benefits from choosing an angle, and the angle is the relationship between Elvis and Tom, but there's other information that is relevant there, like how this affects his wife, which there's a big the moment when she leaves him, and there's like a big info dump about all this stuff, like, but there's some, Elvis was abusive at points with Priscilla, and there's none of that stuff is mentioned in the movie. Like we know that he cheats on her, and the movie version of Priscilla says that she's aware of it and she tolerates it, but there is some other,
they also use drugs and stress as an excuse.
Yes, you're not wrong. I think that is a thing that a person in that situation may say also, like that is a, so Elvis may or may not have
perspective.
Elvis may or may not have claimed that the reason is the pills or whatever, or he needs the pills for whatever reason, that's so I don't, it's hard to say if that's a statement that the movie's making or if it's just trying to follow up on the history. But it's just Priscilla comes in the movie like fairly late. I want to say like probably halfway through. And it's because there's a lot of his career happens before he meets her. Cause he and then there's the rest of the movie is kind of glosses over, and then she pops in and they have a conversation, and then she disappears for a while, and that happens a few times. But and I guess coming back to there's some stuff that I think is relevant to even the story the movie wants to tell that is left out, and it's probably just because the movie's a little long. Like it's like 160 minutes already, so there may or may not have been room for this stuff, but there's particularly, with Priscilla and probably some other things, there's some more information that probably would have benefited the audience. But it might have changed the perception of Elvis, and that might be why it's not there.
Yeah. And but the important thing to remember is also that Priscilla and Lisa Marie gave their approval to the film as well.
And that is true. That's totally important to mention. And she's also Priscilla mentioned after the fact that some of the things she said about Elvis may or may not have been like not discounting the abuse, but she used flowery language and said such. So she, she has a lot of respect for him. And so does Lisa Marie, despite some of this stuff. So it's all important information to bring up. But it's just the movie looks at Elvis through kind of rose-tinted glasses, for better or worse. And I enjoyed the movie for sure. I just think that there's relevant information that isn't there.
Yeah, I think that for some of those reasons, and I mean, covering a person's entire life is never going to happen in a biopic, but it does kind of move and jump around a little bit. And some things are kind of, like you were saying, leave you with some questions or aren't quite filled in, or like you called the whole breakup scene like an info dump. And that's exactly what it is. I love that phrasing, because it's like we pick up a couple years later and then Priscilla's like, I'm leaving you.
Yeah, she's like, she
reasons X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, she throws the pills at him, and it says that he's never around for Lisa Marie and this and that. It's just like it's a lot of information very fast after Priscilla hadn't been in the movie for 15 minutes.
It feels like kind of a cop out on like getting to at least
and that moment might have happened.
Visually tell that story.
Yeah, like that encounter may have happened very similar to how it turned out in the movie. It's just we didn't. It was a very tell, don't show.
Structurally, yeah, tell, don't show, which is what you don't want to do, because what they do tell filmmakers to do, as you know, is to show, not tell.
Yes, it's just exposition dump is a.
I was literally thinking that like 2 minutes ago. And so like for those reasons, I don't think the screenplay would get nominated. I just don't, because it's a little messy.
I'd agree. And that is a thing I would say about a lot of Baz Luhrmann movies. He's a master of production design.
Wonderful. Yes.
All of his movies look different, which is nice. I would say they have a flair about them. I would say
saturation.
They're highly saturated, and like this has I would say a sparkle, kind of like in a way that Great Gatsby kind of did. But also, like the first few minutes of the movie, they through narration, they're talking about comic books, and there's like a lot of like newspapers and stuff flashing by the screen, and just it's a lot of information very fast, and a very like.
And it feels a little fantastical.
Yes.
Which works with Moulin Rouge, which I think is where a lot of these tactics were very successful for him.
Remains his best movie, by the way.
Yeah. And so then he, I actually haven't seen Romeo and Juliet, but I feel like that's where some of that fantastical flashiness would have started. And then it really worked in Moulin Rouge. And he was like, okay, I've got it.
Knowing how much you love Shakespeare, I think you need to watch it. I don't think you're going to like it. And that's, I'm not recommending it to you. I just think that you need to take it in and just, you need to sit down, and because there will be things that you like about it, but you're not going to like the movie overall.
Yeah. I just feel like, from what I do know and have seen of it, it always gave me more of a tone of A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is very fantastical and magic-y, which is not the tone of Romeo and Juliet at all.
No, that's not.
So there's that, and then there's so I think it started there, and then it really worked in Moulin Rouge, like maybe a little too well. And then we have this intermission with Australia, which is gorgeous, but not as flashy at all. It's much more grounded and gritty and tells a very serious story. And then we get Gatsby, which is like epitome of the Roaring 20s. And he brings back so much of that fantastic, like cityscape animation, magical kind of tone. And then uses it again here in Elvis. And it drives me insane. I don't know what to say.
Really,
other than it drives me insane.
It's a lot. It's like very like sensory overload.
Yeah.
And it's like exhausting. at a time that, or in a context that might not be the best way to get a point across. You know, like you don't. And
like just zooming over Las Vegas and all of these shots, and then like coming up on the hotel and having to pan and then push in. I'm just like,
and it's very like montage heavy.
Yeah. I just don't want to feel like I'm playing a video game. I don't want to feel like I'm in cyberpunk while I'm watching a movie.
Elvis, like he talks early on about how he liked comic books and such. And by the way, the Captain Marvel he's talking about these days, his name is Shazam. It's a different character than the Marvel the MCU Captain Marvel. He's over on the DC side, but so Elvis talks about liking comic books, and so a lot of these like little montage and stuff, like they have weird animations in them, and the movie's in a grid. It's in like comic book frames, and and it's very, very Baz Luhrmann, and very just like it's sensory overload, and it's almost distracting when they could have spent that time more effectively elsewhere.
I think it just needed to be used more sparingly. I feel like at the beginning that you're talking about, it was okay. But as like
if it was just the intro, like if they didn't change anything about the first 10 minutes of the movie, I think it would have been fine. It's that they used that kind of thing repeatedly. Like any time they skip time, basically they have like a montage with some comic books and some flashy lights and
I just feel like every time we see Las Vegas, I feel like I'm in a video game because of that, just like animation and like rendering of the city, and like I don't know. It just doesn't fly for me. It feels a little bit too fantastical for a movie that wants so badly to be honoring, but also exploring and highlighting this man's life, which was not easy. It had its ups and downs and its tragedies and its stresses. And so I don't know. It's I don't think they quite got the balance between wanting to accentuate the flashiness and the tone and the visuals of the 1950s and 1960s Las Vegas, style with the seriousness of the content and the story.
I would agree, and especially considering they filmed so much stuff for this movie, like this
so much.
It all could have been fixed in the edit. Well, like it's probably some work that they needed another pass on the script, but also like that they probably could have tightened the movie up a little bit, and they could have rearranged some stuff, or eliminated all the flashy lights, and then it probably would have benefited the final product.
There were a lot of montages to kind of try and gap the time.
So many montages.
It's very effective in the way that they shot it. I mean, every shot is a masterpiece, but is it necessary? No. You can tighten it up, But I was very impressed when I was like watching it. I was like, they're matching. Sometimes you can't differentiate between the what is archival footage and what they actually shot and made to look, whether they shot it on film or digitally and then aged it. In those montages, especially, it's hard to tell, which is.
I'm glad you bring that up, because I'm gonna ask a question. Could you tell when it was Austin Butler singing and when it was Elvis? Yeah. And I ask for someone who probably knows Elvis music better than I do. I kind of figured that most of it was Austin Butler until at the end when they do that Unchained Melody performance. It was Elvis at the piano. It's on YouTube. It's Elvis's last time on stage. But and they actually show footage of Elvis instead of Austin Butler. But
I couldn't, and I got that from the soundtrack too, because Austin Butler's credited with I think it's like the first half of the movie.
It's right here. It's the second half. Quote from Austin Butler: "All the 50 stuff, that's me." Butler said. After that, it's a mix of me and Elvis. On Suspicious Minds in particular, I can't tell when my voice ends and his begins. And that is because like a lot of the earlier recordings, they're there aren't good enough versions to use that sound good, like sound right in a movie. And then
They're
later on,
archival.
sounds like he probably recorded every song, and then they used a little bit of Hammond, a little bit of Elvis here and there. But
where they could, definitely. But you really can't tell because they are so closely matched. I mean, I don't know how they did it. I mean, this performance it's almost not even a performance. It's like a embodiment.
And the music production on this movie is stunning. You know, it's like absolutely stunning.
Music production on any Baz Luhrmann film, I will give that credit. Oh my God, it's always fun and always nice to listen to and explore. And I did hear a quote from Baz Luhrmann. I was watching some interviews, and he was saying what they try to do with bringing in new music into a period film is to embody that period in a way that makes sense for today. So not particularly updating, but maybe more like reinterpreting.
Right.
You know, and that makes so much sense. And I think it engages modern audiences in a way that just using the originals wouldn't. And it's so smart.
There's a lot of like remix of Elvis tunes in this that are used in really smart ways. Like whenever anything with Priscilla, there's like a really soft version, like instrumental of "Can't Help Falling in Love with You." And that's like the love theme in this movie. And it's always there, and it's played real slow. So like you only notice that's what it is if you like pay attention to it. But it's just a really sweet,
subtle.
Yeah.
They do a really good job with that, with using the score and putting it in there and adapting in the same way that they do with their pop and their rock. And
absolutely,
it's effective.
And while we're talking, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I wrote those notes too, because while it's effective, I was like, I don't know if they'd be able to get an original song nomination, or what would a score nomination look like, because it's so specific and not like the standard of what you would think.
There almost has to be some original music in here, but like there's also an original music. Like there aren't original Elvis songs, but there's like musical score type stuff. But a lot of even the score is again just remixes of Elvis music, or rearrangements.
Yeah, that's why I don't know if they're going to bag those nominations or not, just because it's like, can you say that this is an original score? Can you say that this is a original song for, I don't know. But the screenplay would be categorized as original screenplay, not adapted, I think, unless they took this from a book, but I don't think they did.
No, I don't.
But I don't know. I'll be surprised if it gets nominated for screenplay, but I just don't.
I don't think it'll get screenplay. I think it will be considered for editing, even though I think the edit is ultimately a little clumsy. And well, no, it's not clumsy. It's just it's unnecessarily erratic. So I don't think it should win, but I think it's gonna, because what the edit for this movie was not easy. It took a lot of talent and a lot of patience, but it's just like an onslaught of information.
It goes hand in hand with the camera work and the cinematography, though. 100%, because I don't think
it should be in contention for cinematography, like seriously.
Yes,
I think I think it will get an editing nomination, but it will not deserve to win.
I think the cinematography was my favorite thing about this film, because
me too, and that's the thing that's always my favorite thing about Baz Luhrmann movies, because they're always very flashy without a lot of substance. I think Elvis is generally an exception to that rule, but
I really admired how the cinematography specifically, it's aided a little bit, by the editing too, but the cinematography specifically blurs the lines between narrative fiction film and documentary film. It really does, especially at the end of this film where they mix the footage together with the sound. And that that blending and that distinction is actually what I wrote my master's thesis on. And my mentor and I, my mentor and I kind of came up with this term called genre fluidity, which can be applied to any and all genres. But I specifically talked about it with examples between fiction and documentary films, and looking at genre codes and what are the elements of films that we say makes this that genre and this that genre.
Right.
And how do we distinguish them, but also how do films combine them and make that genre fluid, you know? And I feel like this film is such a good modern example of that, because there are times, mostly due to the cinematography, where I'm like, what's this archival? Is it not archival? How is this shot? It's edited together in a way that makes me wonder, you know, did the editor do documentaries in the past? I haven't looked, but there is an underlying current of documentation in this film that is just so, I don't want to say subtle, but it goes back to that comment about media literacy that I had, and being like a healthy skeptic of what is real and what is not real in a film, especially in a film like this, because it does lend itself to so many documentary-esque genre codes, you know, like stock film or the editing. And that's why I asked about the animations in the beginning, because many documentaries do use animations as visual aids in continuing the story.
Right. Kind of filling in gaps that they don't have footage for. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's why I felt, you know, there's so many different things, and I'd have to watch it again to really like make a comprehensive list. But there is an element of that genre fluidity in this film, which was so fun for me, because it's like what came out of my master's program, you know? And I was just like, see, this is what I'm talking about.
Excellent.
So
I love it.
I think that's what gives the movie so much, when it doesn't feel grounded, it comes back to its grounding in a way that is very, I don't want to say wholesome, because it's not the right word, but human, maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
The last like 10 minutes of this film was just the switching between the Elvis and the Austin and the event and the back and forth and telling the story. I was just like, am I watching a performative documentary? No, because there is a performative, we call it a mode, but it's kind of like a subgenre of documentary, or like how the story is told. There's a performative mode where, especially with like an expository, like storytelling kind of documentary, where, you know, actors are brought in to reenact events or something like that.
Right. And that is like, that kind of what's happening here? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's so very interesting to me, because there are little elements that or codes, as I would say in scholarship, genre codes, that I was like ticking off going along. And I was like, what is visually and technically and story-wise, you know, ticking off those boxes. So in that way, you know, it's a history lesson. It's a case study of Elvis's life. It's a biopic. It's a documentary in some ways. And I think that's why it's so weird to use the word biopic in some ways, because it's so flashy, but also grounded in like documentary practices in some ways. So it's very odd to describe it that way, because, you know, when I think biopic, I think something like
Walk the Line.
Yeah.
That's pinning another musician. And I love that movie. And I don't know, you could, we've had a few in a row, like Bohemian Rhapsody came out a few years ago.
Bohemian Rhapsody is 100% a biopic.
Yes.
I never got documentary feels.
I would counter that with only the concert at the end, which is the absolutely stunning and probably the best part of that whole movie. But and I would swing the other way with Rocket Man, which a movie that I absolutely adore. And it also, not stylistically in the same way, but it swings into like fantastical elements at certain points.
Okay.
Also, have you seen it?
I've been told to.
With Elton John, but like okay. So
I've been told to so many times, and it's a very special movie to one of my best friends, and I feel so bad I haven't watched it yet.
So good, yeah. So there's a scene where he's performing Pinball Wizard. He's playing the piano, and like the crowd is super into it and stuff. Like, and then he like just starts to float up into the air. Like his feet go first, and his like feet are suspended, and he's still playing the piano, and he like floats up into the sky. Like, and it's that obviously didn't happen, but like, so it's a stylistic and fantastical interpretation of like it's an internalization of the way he feels. Yeah.
It's fictionalized.
But it's like it's visualizing the feeling in the audience, so like, or the feeling for being inside the room in a certain way. And that Elvis by Baz Luhrmann is fantastical in totally different ways. But so it's I would kind of put them in the same basket from that point of view. Now I wouldn't necessarily say that there's as much biographical or documentary type stuff in Rocketman, but fantastically I would group them. And then we mentioned Walk the Line, which is a like James Mangold movies in general are kind of like very old Hollywood, then it's just it's tightly structured, and it shows the events, and it moves from one event to the next fairly quickly. And he lived a long life, and it covers a big chunk of it. So there's a lot of information, but it is it's almost very straightforward in a way that probably Bohemian Rhapsody is, despite some historical weirdness with that movie that doesn't really work. But in a way that Elvis and Rocketman kind of are not, and these are all in the last 20 years. And most of them are much more recent than that. Like Walk the Line was 2005. And then Bohemian Rhapsody was like 2017, 2018. They're all in the last 3-4 years or so. So it's, and it's
definitely becoming more of a trend. Yeah. And I want to know who they're going to do next.
Stylistically, they kind of run a spectrum, right? And there's overlap for sure, but there's just if we're talking about how to make how to do a biopic in different ways and mix different genres into it, they're all structurally very different, even though they're all they're ostensibly telling historical events, whether or not they've twisted the fiction or not. So so it's just it's, very, very interesting, and we're definitely getting it's an interesting time for movies about musicians because there are quite a few in the last several years.
Yeah. And, we were talking pre-show while we were kind of like surfing, doing a little bit of research about the Blonde movie coming out with Ana de Armas about Marilyn Monroe. Mm-hmm. And while it's not a musician pick, it's still in that right era of a lot of these stories, and especially Elvis. And I'm wondering how that film is going to bridge those gaps too, between the fantastical and the realism and the fiction and the documentary, and how those all build a modern biopic. I think there's may eventually be a distinction between like the fantastical biopic and like the like pre 2010 biopic.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I feel like those are very kind of like straightforward and just kind of do want to tell a story of somebody's life. Whereas like now we're seeing a lot of artistic interpretation, which is fun and great to watch. And so we were looking on IMDb, and they were listing characters which are integral to Marilyn Monroe's story. First of all, Ana de Armas is credited as Norma Jean, which is Marilyn Monroe's real name. Right. Yeah. And not Marilyn Monroe, which one is interesting. Two, Bobby Cannavale playing Joe DiMaggio was the ex-athlete. And Adrian Brody playing Arthur Miller was credited as the playwright. So they don't actually have names. It's more like they're archetypes, you know? So I'm really wondering how that movie is going to play into this time period that Elvis explores, but also this like trend of creatively adapted biopics. I think Elvis is just one more in a long line that's going to end up being a new creative trend in biopic production.
And you're probably absolutely right. If they keep doing very well, like Bohemian Rhapsody was like I love that movie
when
it came out. It like made more money than any biopic ever before, or something like that. Like Rocket Man did similar. I don't think it broke the record, but it did similar numbers, right? And I'm sure this movie has made plenty. I'm not looking at the box office right now.
I don't know.
Well, okay, Wikipedia, and I don't know how recently this was updated, but it says 185.6 million against a budget of 85. So they've doubled their money. And that's in old Hollywood terms, that's enough to make another one, so they'll find some other artist and make another movie. But that these days it's harder to tell. That's that because that's not a blockbuster. That's just a success. So
right. And what was I gonna say? Oh, about Bohemian Rhapsody. As much as this, we started this talk about, I told that story about wanting that Elvis CD when I was so very young, like music shopping with my dad. And then years and years later, when Bohemian Rhapsody came out, my dad and I went and saw that together, so it's like so many of those things. I think people are very emotionally invested in those kinds of things for those kinds of reasons. And
I
think that's why
a lot of my love for music comes from my parents sharing their music with me, and now it's my music, and that's that's an echo of how many others can say the same thing, right? So it's
right.
It lasts forever because it's timeless. Anything else you want to wrap up? I do want to. Or anything else you want to mention before we wrap? I want to mention there's like one scene in this movie that like really got me, like I'm like dancing in my seat and stuff. And it's when he's just about to start his residence in Las Vegas, and there's talking about I need a 30-piece orchestra and I need all that stuff. Like, and he's just it's 2 or 3 minutes of he's on stage and he's like, all right, trumpets, give me some rhythm. And then it's like, all right, he tells the drummer what to do. And he goes to the piano. It's like, and it's calling out all the musicians and telling them what to play. And they build this, they're making music together. And I mentioned earlier, like it's the process that really interests me. It's like, okay, like I love to experience the product. I also love to talk about how we got there. And that's a lot of the reason why I make this podcast. So it's, so like I have not written anything very good, but I have composed some like orchestral music in the past, so it's like just watching him just have a good time holding that microphone, and it's like let's make something great together. And it's just like there's just a really poppy tune, and just the Austin Butler was selling it really well, and it really got me. I was very excited at that moment.
And I love that, like, it's not just like this, like it's a wonderful scene. And it does have a very euphoric kind of effect.
Yeah.
But I do love that in the middle of it, the dialogue is like, no, like up the octave or like slow it down.
Using real terms, like using actual terms. Yeah. And adjusting and, listening and feeling the music. Baz Luhrmann knows what he's doing when it comes to movies and music. I agree. And
blending the two together.
And it reminded me of a scene that like is very different, but kind of like, have you ever seen Amadeus?
No. Oh, I need to.
It's one of my favorite movies ever, but there's a scene at the end where Mozart is too ill. Like he's trying to write his Requiem, but he's basically on his deathbed, and he's unable to to hold the pen and stuff. So he's dictating to Salieri, and it's like to talking back and forth, and they're using real music terms, and it could be very alienating for the audience. Like, and it was just for some reason, that's the scene that came to mind in my head when I was watching this one. It's like it's a very, very collaborative and ultimately joyful thing. And they're like, it's not quite right, but then everybody figures it out, and it's like it falls into a groove, and this other scene I'm talking about, like it's very different. Like, it's kind of somber, like Mozart is dying, and it's very quiet. There's almost no score at all, but it's once they figure it out, like the tune for the Requiem comes in the background, like, so it's building each layer, and then eventually it leads you to the product. And it's like, it was again, I wouldn't say that the execution is very similar at all, but it was it linked together in my head when I was watching the movie. It's like,
no, I definitely get it.
Yeah. Anything else we want to mention as we wrap up?
Yeah, just
please,
building off of that, building up of the collaboration.
Yeah.
I love the sequence when Elvis is kind of like trying to escape his family. They have a little argument, but he goes to Beale Street, and he has to like make his way over to the club with his friends, and he's trying to make his way over to BB King, but he like pulls up in his car, and then he's like swarmed on Beale Street. And I was stunned to learn that they actually recreated and built a whole set for the exterior of Beale Street.
Wow. Okay.
Right. Which is crazy in itself. And so then they had to shoot at night,
right,
and like really early in the morning to get that nighttime shoot in. And so Baz Luhrmann said that because they built that whole set, and they had all of these extras, and so Austin has one goal in the scene, which is to get from point A to point B. Mm-hmm. He's like being swarmed by fans on Beale Street. And apparently they let just like 5 cameras cover the scene and follow him and track the action and just roll.
Wow. Okay.
And just roll. And that's what they used in the film. And I love that, because that is so, it's almost, to use a documentary term, it's almost like cinema verite, as if you were just going to or like cinema truth,
right?
For documentary, if you were just going to film the subject and not interfere or intervene or influence in any way, and you were just going to point a camera, like point and shoot.
And obviously these are all actors, so it's Austin Butler playing Elvis, and then a bunch of extras, but but it's still a really fascinating way. Let's just let it play out, and we'll capture it, and then we'll cut it together in a way that makes sense. That's fascinating. Yeah.
And very theatrical too, of like coordinating a huge group scene on stage, which is essentially what they were doing, and then capturing it in like a very point and shoot kind of way. I mean, obviously there is camera movement, and it's not that simple, right, but still, just to have a set number of cameras running to capture that, it's so collaborative in a different way from the previous scene that we were talking about. But I love it because it integrates theater and like documentary studies and filmmaking, and the 3 different things that I study and into one sequence. And I just love it when filmmakers trust their technicians.
Mm-hmm. Me too, as a technician.
Right. Their technicians, their set design, and those technicians. So like the camera techs, the set techs, and their actors. When a director can just trust those 3 elements and let the cameras roll, I think that is just so purely artistic in a way that is just like you don't get to see a lot. So that sequence in itself, I love that sequence.
One other there's at least one thing I can kind of relate to Elvis Presley on, and that is in all this footage of Elvis performing, God, he's sweaty. Like, and having been on stage, like, I certainly don't do it professionally, but I've been on stage a few times in my life, it's like wearing a suit or wearing a costume in a play, and it's just like the lights are on you and it's awful.
Oh my God, I have photos of me from high school, and I was like literally wearing this like floor length blue velvet coat on stage. Oh my God, it was so hot. And I totally get that. Oh my God.
I played the Grinch. And I was I was like, so, first of all, this was 15 years and 75 pounds ago. So, like the full leotard and a Santa suit, or like at least a Santa cat. I didn't wear the pants, but I had to paint myself green, and it's just like by the end of I'm just like melting. It's like my face is just running off. It's terrible.
Oh my God, I can't imagine. Oh, but I do appreciate that they really went for the the makeup and costuming is so good in this movie already, but to go that extra mile and like really
mess him up a little bit. Like he doesn't, like, especially if you're, you don't notice if you're even in the front row. Like if you're watching a concert, you can't tell that, but if you're going to put the camera right up in the guy's face, it's like, this is what he looked like, and it's hard work. Like it's show business is not glamorous. Like it's hard work to go up day after day and sing. Like,
yeah. Oh my God. Exhausting. And I think that just shows that, the Baz and, everybody on this film, but Baz, so aware of the camera and the nature of filmmaking itself, that if you were to actually do a close-up on Elvis during one of those performances, that's exactly what he would look like. And being aware of that transference of those images on screen and what that close-up actually looks like. Actors go through a lot of training to be very aware of their faces and how that translates on camera. For instance, one of my biggest pet peeves is when actors won't train their eyesight correctly when they're looking at another character in a close-up.
Or they're like looking past their. Oh, okay, yeah, that's even more distracting.
They dart from eye to eye, and you'll watch it now. Like, oh my God, you won't be able to unsee it. And I look out for that all the time, and it annoys me to no end. So when actors are like from one eye to the other,
they're like talking to one person, and they're just like looking around.
Yeah. And so what it is that they're not training their eye on the eye closest to the camera. On their scene partner, right. on the right side. And so it's those kinds of things that make acting so technical for filmmaking, because you can get away with that on stage. No problem.
If you're on stage, like, okay, you walk over here and you find your light. And like, generally, if you end up in kind of the right place, like relatively, you have like a little circle where you can land and it's okay. But just like with, even just dealing with,
you would think though to find your light. It's so much harder.
That's fair. But compared to acting on camera, and you have a paper thin focus plane that your face has to land in, it's just like you have a tape mark on the floor. But even if you're like leaning a little bit to the left and you're out of frame, or your eyes are out of focus, it's just like it's very technical and very precise, or it can be at least.
Yeah, exactly. Film acting is about the minutia and the micro. It doesn't take a lot.
Theater acting is about it's big, grandiose, and not to say that you can't be very subtle, but you have to be able to be seen from the back row.
You use your whole body on stage, and that's not to say you don't use your whole body in film. You do.
There's overlap on both of these points. Yeah.
Right. And like on stage, the technical things that you would have to think about is like making sure that you're open enough and you're not closed, and like all those things. So it's just very different. But back to my original point, that awareness of how the camera is going to pick those things up and messing up Austin Butler's Elvis a little bit, showing that sweat, showing that makeup.
Yeah, like his hair is out of place and his face is glistening and like his costume's a little soiled and this is like yeah.
It's so aware of all of those details to put a close up on that. It's so intentional, but it feels so unguarded. It feels so natural and raw, and it's honestly a little like jarring because we don't usually see that kind of like mess on screen like that, and so I think, I don't know, it's part of its flashiness in a way too.
Excellent. So thank you, Katie, for hanging out as always.
Yeah.
My name is Brandon. You can find me basically everywhere at Engine25, sometimes with an underscore. You can find Katy at KatherineBurrell.com. This has been Engine25 Reviews. Look out probably next week. We're a little late on Thor, but I think we're going to get it done for next weekend for a review of Thor: Love and Thunder. I want to do Nope in the next couple of weeks. And until then, go watch a movie, guys. Thanks.